Hello and welcome to On Watch by MarketWatch. I'm Jeremy Owens. A $100,000 salary no longer buys you a middle-class lifestyle. That was the headline on a story last week from senior reporter Venessa Wong, and it sparked a lot of debate among MarketWatch readers. Today, Venessa comes on the show and explains why the inflation shock of recent years put the final stake in the middle class. Then we take a critical look at one of the hottest depression treatments in America. After the death of Friends actor Matthew Perry was partly blamed on ketamine, reporter Eleanor Laise dove into the world of ketamine therapy, which is quickly becoming a multi-billion-dollar industry. She joins us to warn Americans about the dangers of at-home use of ketamine. Plus, we'll take a quick look at the news stories we're watching right now and how they will affect your wallet. First, let's talk about the middle class. The inflation shock has left many middle-income families unable to save what they need for the future or accomplish other financial goals that have long been considered anchors of the middle-class lifestyle. MarketWatch senior personal finance reporter Venessa Wong reported on that last week, and her story attracted more than 100 comments and counting. But rising inflation was only the final dagger in the back of the middle class. Venessa believes the high cost of three basic economic needs is what actually caused the dramatic effects of inflation. So I invited her on the show to break it down for us. Well, Venessa, your story last week sparked a lot of conversation, and I wanted to bring that conversation to the podcast. And when I read your story, there's a lot of numbers in there, but I think there's one line that really brought it home for me and says exactly what you're trying to say here. And that was, being middle income no longer affords a middle class quality of life in many parts of the US. Could you kind of explain that contention to me and how you came to that conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a personal topic for me and a lot of my peers. I think we've recognized that we are statistically doing well. Many of us are statistically falling somewhere in the middle of the income pay range in the US or in our markets, but still not feeling like it's easy or possible to get ahead. And it's a shocking realization that you may be doing okay or even slightly better than okay in many parts of the country right now, but still not be able to do more than cover your basic necessities.
And that's not what the middle class lifestyle has always been about. You need to be able to save for the future. You need to be able to enjoy yourself occasionally, but that's not what's happening right now from what you've seen.
That's right. I mean, middle class typically conveys some sense of financial security. And it also conveys some sense of being able to cover more than your needs, to cover some wants. The Washington Post did a survey and they identified 6 things that most people consider to be markers of a middle class quality of life, which are having a stable job, being able to save for the future, being able to afford a $1,000 emergency without debt, being able to pay bills on time without worry, having health insurance, and being able to retire comfortably. And doing all of those 6 things right now on a median income is very difficult. There are surveys at people who make low 6 figures. If you just kind of like eked past $100,000, it doesn't get you that far anymore. A lot of this is due to rising costs for housing, childcare, healthcare. These are big ticket items that eat up a lot of your monthly budget and don't leave very much for discretionary spending, for other necessary spending for that matter. There was a Zillow survey, for example, that showed that the typical family that's looking for a house right now would have to spend 66% of their income on their mortgage and childcare costs at the moment.
Yeah, and I want to really get into those 3 inputs you brought up there: housing, healthcare, and childcare. Now, a lot of what we're discussing has come up since the big inflation shock of 2021, 2022. I mean, we're still dealing with inflation now. But those 3 inputs have been getting much more expensive for quite a while now. It was the inflation shock that all of a sudden really hit and people felt, but that inflation shock hit so hard to the middle class because the costs of housing, healthcare, and childcare had come up so much over decades at that point.
That's right. I mean, housing is very difficult right now if you're a renter or a buyer. If you're trying to buy a house right now, interest rates are very high. The costs of houses haven't really come down as interest has skyrocketed. Renters obviously continue to be sort of subject to the whims of their landlords. And it's also one of those things that becomes more difficult as you have children and your housing needs sort of expand.
And your childcare needs suddenly pop in.
Correct.
When you're already paying a lot for childcare, healthcare, housing, all of a sudden your grocery bill going up 20%, it's that much harder. And that's definitely what we've seen over the last couple of years. And just to give some numbers to it, the median income in the US for 2022 is just under $115,000. While you showed some numbers that a family with 2 adults and 2 children in large US cities now must spend more than $117,000 annually simply to cover basic needs.
That's right. I mean, and we've seen for many years now Americans taking on debt to cover basic expenses. There's so many ways to do that: credit cards, personal loans. People are funding their educations with student loans. Mortgages are really expensive. So I just think that like the shortfall in our incomes is being made up by this growing debt burden, which has become really a very hot political topic too, because I think we've reached a point where we are recognizing that this is a problem and one that's not sustainable. And we already are starting to see delinquencies rise again. And this is also in a climate where a lot of costs have continued to rise as well. One of the delinquencies that's up again now are auto delinquencies. The cost of cars have risen spectacularly over the past few years, and we're seeing that the average monthly auto payment is about $700 a month now, which is a lot more than it was before the pandemic. Auto insurance is up as well. So just like the cost to do basic things in America, this isn't anything excessive. It's like, where do I live? How do I get to work? How do I buy my food? How do I pay for medical bills? Have all become very big questions that are insurmountable for a lot of families.
Yeah, when I saw that figure, that 117.5K needed for a family of four to live in a large metro area, it actually seemed low to me living in the San Francisco Bay Area, where everything is so expensive, especially housing.
It is. And it doesn't account for anything that you need for savings. It doesn't account for any unexpected expenses. And it doesn't even account for wants. If you want to have a hobby, or if you want your children to have a hobby, if you want to do anything besides sort of like daily survival, this estimate doesn't build in any cost for that. But obviously, millions of Americans are getting by on about this much or less in many cases. And what's going on is that they are often compromising things that they need, or compromising on things that they want, or compromising on saving for the future in order to make all of it work.
Well, it would be good to see wages gain along with inflation. We actually have seen wages gain after a long period of stagnation in the last few years. But a lot of those wage gains have been to hourly workers on the lower rung of the salary scale. So that really hasn't helped the middle class that much.
I think what we're seeing now, though, is that like getting beyond low income into middle income results obviously in some quality of life improvement, but not exactly what you would expect, right? And once you're part of this sort of like middle income band, you're still sort of facing a sense of financial precarity that is shocking for the amount of money that you're making. There was a recent survey in which 48% of respondents who earn more than $100,000 said they were living paycheck to paycheck. And that includes about a third of those who earn more than $200,000. But when you think about the cost of living in a lot of metro areas, this actually isn't that shocking. I think that people are still expecting that this money will buy them more lifestyle than they're actually getting. And it's because the costs just keep on escalating. And this is something that the Biden administration has talked about a lot in terms of corporate greed and greedflation.
Well, yeah, Vanessa, and greedflation is kind of my area because when we talk greedflation, what we're saying is that companies are using inflation to pad their profits. And I've done a lot of deep dives into the profit margins of the S&P 500 over the last 3 years, especially since we started seeing inflation in 21. Early on, we saw those margins expand for grocery companies and for fast food. And while those companies have upped their wages for the lower rung of the salary band in the past couple of years, they've seen those margins kind of contract again. Where the margins are really fat right now is big tech. And they laid off a lot of workers last year and suddenly the profits got huge. And the real danger now is that big tech is going to every other sector and telling them, hey guys, you can lay off some middle income workers to help your profits out. And I know there are software salesmen right now in C-suites telling people, hey, you can lay off six-figure workers and just hire a couple of $50,000 a year college grads and buy this AI software, and they can do the same job. And that's where we're going to see a lot of real fear, and there should be real fear over the next few years for middle-class workers.
There's so many things that are working against the middle band of the workforce, whether it's a focus on corporate profits, whether it's a focus on tech to reduce costs. And I think that's the sense of, emotionally anyway, psychologically precarity that a lot of people are feeling, which, was part of what being middle class once symbolized in this country, was having a sense of stability, having a sense of stable employment, which enables you to do all of those things, right? Save for the future and for an emergency and retire one day. And all of those things are just slowly being eroded.
And I don't see anything that's going to change that coming up. I mean, I feel like this is something we're going to have to continue talking about because it is the thing that everybody's going to get frustrated about. If you do everything right in your 20s and early 30s, and you get to that point in your career where you're making six figures and you feel like you should be actually enjoying yourself after working so hard to get there, well, it's not what it was supposed to be. It's not what it's been in the past.
That's right. There's been a lot of emphasis recently on positive economic metrics, right? And how real incomes are up. So even though there's been record inflation, incomes have sort of made up for that in some way. And we should be back to our pre-pandemic vibe because of that. To which I would say two things. Vibes weren't great before the pandemic. I think there were a lot of cost of living pressures for middle income people before, we faced a global health crisis. And also, I think we should always be evaluating who is enjoying economic growth. Because if there's anything that we've come out of the pandemic knowing and trying to keep in mind is that those gains are not evenly distributed. And so, even while we're seeing low-income workers come away from this recovery with bigger gains in wages, we also saw them suffer the greatest losses at the beginning of the pandemic. I personally think it's politically dangerous to ignore these qualitative points of feedback that might be obscured by macroeconomic data.
Venessa, I do really appreciate the conversation. I appreciate that your story sparked this conversation. If you have not read the story, please go do so. And if you want to talk more about this, please hit us up at onwatch@marketwatch.com. You can reach out to Venessa independently as well to give her your story. Thanks so much for joining us, Venessa.
Thank you so much for having me.
We're going to take a quick break. Coming up, ketamine therapy. Stay with us. Welcome back to On Watch by MarketWatch. Before the break, we talked with Venessa Wong about her article on the middle class. Now we welcome MarketWatch healthcare reporter Eleanor Laise to talk about a very important investigative story she recently published. Ketamine is a powerful tranquilizer that has also been used as a recreational drug. But in recent years, it has turned into something much different: a treatment for depression. Tesla chief executive Elon Musk has admitted using the drug, saying it is helpful for getting one out of a negative frame of mind. But ketamine was also a factor in the death of Friends actor Matthew Perry. And when Eleanor dug in, she found many other troubling anecdotes about the drug's usage. So we asked her to join us this week and talk about the multi-billion-dollar industry and how to avoid the worst parts of it. Well, Eleanor, I've always known ketamine as a very powerful tranquilizer and a sometimes party drug named Special K. But how did it become like a trendy depression treatment?
That's right. This could be a really confusing area for patients right now because, like you said, ketamine is many things all at once. It's an FDA-approved anesthetic, which has been around for more than 50 years. It's a controlled substance that can have hallucinogenic effects, and as such, it's a party drug. But it's also increasingly popular as a mental health treatment, even though it has not been approved by the FDA for that purpose.
Right. There is one nasal spray that's been approved by the FDA, ketamine, which is marketed by Johnson & Johnson as a nasal spray called Spravato. And that's a ketamine-derived drug that was approved in 2019. But ketamine itself has not been approved for psychiatric use. And that's really what people need to know, is that no regulator has said, yes, ketamine is good for depression and people should be using it.
Right. The FDA has certainly not said that about ketamine itself. What happened really was in recent decades, there was research studying lower doses of ketamine, the sub-anesthetic doses, not the level that might knock you out before major surgery, finding that those sub-anesthetic doses looked promising as a potential mental health treatment. So doctors started prescribing it for this off-label use, even though ketamine has not actually been approved for treatment of any psychiatric disorders. Ketamine therapy has become quite a big business. I mean, over the past decade, it has grown from virtually nothing to, by some estimates, roughly 1,200 to 1,500 ketamine clinics nationwide. The ketamine clinic market is valued at about $3.4 billion. Some ketamine therapy providers will offer in-person only treatments. In many cases, that means you're getting the ketamine through an IV with in-person preparation and aftercare from a clinician.
And that lines up with what I've heard about psychedelic treatment just in general, right? This is something that you want to do with somebody in a controlled environment.
Right. But we also have many providers that are offering online ketamine therapy where it's done more remotely. And the pandemic really helped spur the growth of the online therapy providers because the regulations on telehealth prescribing of controlled substances were relaxed during the COVID lockdowns.
But it's the at home where you found a lot of people who had really bad experiences through telehealth and at home administration of this drug, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are some overarching concerns about whether we really have enough data on ketamine to arrive at firm conclusions, but particular concerns are being raised about at-home therapy for a number of reasons. A number of the experts I spoke with and the FDA itself have expressed a lot of discomfort with at-home ketamine use. First of all, the lack of in-person monitoring. Ketamine can cause changes in your blood pressure and heart rate. It causes, of course, sedation and dissociation. Over time, ketamine misuse can cause bladder damage. And getting back to this question of dosage, when you get treatments in a clinic, often those are the IV ketamine infusions, and the dosing there can be a little bit more straightforward. At-home therapy in many cases involves ketamine lozenges or troches that dissolve slowly in your mouth. And the FDA has said that there's variation in the dosages of these oral compounded ketamine products that are marketed by telehealth platforms, making it hard to predict what risks might be associated with those treatments.
I think the most depressing anecdote you have in your story is about somebody who was going through the at-home in that way with the dissolvable ketamine lozenge and was supposed to spit out what was left. And the person in the at-home therapy told them to swallow it. And they ended up with toxicity in their blood from too much ketamine, right?
Right. That person arrived at the emergency room unresponsive and was found to have a concentration of ketamine in her blood that was double the level typically used for general anesthesia. So there's definitely the potential for mistakes to be made either by the patient or the provider. Actually, one survey last year found that more than half of people who had tried at-home ketamine therapy had either accidentally or intentionally taken more than the recommended dose. Of course, mistakes can happen anywhere, but if you're in a clinical setting, at least there are providers on hand to help you. One concern I've heard from some in the industry is that some prospective patients seem to be sort of price shopping for ketamine, looking for the cheapest product they can find. But experts say that's really not a good idea. There are a lot of other points to consider if you're really looking at this as a potential mental health treatment. Is this a provider who's going to give you ketamine no matter what? Or is there a screening process and a thorough medical and psychiatric evaluation to determine whether ketamine is actually an appropriate treatment for you? Is this a very transactional process, or is there going to be some sort of ongoing relationship between you and the practitioner? Are they going to follow up with you and discuss any side effects you experienced and whether it makes sense to continue the treatment? A large professional group of ketamine practitioners that's coming up with some new guidelines on ketamine therapy says they're not going to be recommending online-only business models that don't include that sort of ongoing relationship.
Yeah, and you spoke with somebody who had developed an at-home ketamine therapy startup business, and he had actually gotten out of the business and was very concerned about where it was headed, right?
Right. So he co-founded a mental health company that offered at-home ketamine therapy a few years ago, but he grew very uncomfortable for a few different reasons. He sensed pressure from prospective investors to sort of maximize the profitability of patients. He felt there was sort of a push toward longer term ketamine therapy, sort of regardless of whether that was the best thing for the patient. And again, the price shopping that he saw among some of the patients seemed to him, like he said, sort of a race to the bottom.
So, just to break this down and make it as simple as possible for people, ketamine has not been approved for use for depression. And the at home ketamine therapy business has some issues right now that could make it dangerous for those who take part in it.
Right. And that's a very sharp contrast with the rules that the FDA has established for Spravato. The FDA has said you cannot take Spravato at home. It has to be done in a healthcare setting. Patients have to stay for at least 2 hours after each dose to be monitored for any adverse effects. So it's two very different worlds that exist here.
Right, exactly. And I think, well, there may be even three, Eleanor, because you've got the nasal spray and then you've got the IV treatment that is very similar where you need to be in the clinic. And I think that's the one that first sprung up and you saw ketamine clinics all over the place. And then the pandemic allowed this to be done through telehealth, sent to people's homes, even though it's not FDA approved. Are those rules in place forever? Is there anything that could push back against the telehealth ketamine industry?
So those more flexible rules that existed during the pandemic are still in place for right now. Officially, they are supposed to expire at the end of this year, but there are signs that it's quite likely they could be with us in some form for the longer term.
And that's because they're very useful for other drugs. A lot of ill people who find it troublesome to go out of the house, their lives have been made easier because of these rules, but not for ketamine, just in general.
Right. Nobody wants to really cut off access for someone who really needs a treatment. So the DEA has already said it's committed to the expansion of telemedicine and it's working on some new rules around this. So stay tuned. We'll definitely be watching how that plays out.
For sure. And if somebody is considering using ketamine to treat their depression, their PTSD, whatever they may be facing, what would your suggestion to them be?
You're likely going to confront this choice between in-person therapy in a clinic and at-home therapy. And you want to consider all these risks that we've discussed in terms of how ketamine can impact your blood pressure, your heart rate, all those factors. And I would weigh the FDA's warnings about the compounded oral ketamine products and the variation in dosage and the unpredictability of potential side effects there. Some doctors say the doses available from some of these online providers are alarmingly high, higher than what they themselves would offer a patient through an IV when they're monitoring them in person in a clinic. But we want to acknowledge that affordability and accessibility are important issues.
Yeah, it could cost thousands of dollars per session, right? Nothing about ketamine is usually covered by healthcare because it is not FDA approved. Maybe Spravato is the one thing that you could possibly see getting covered by some form of healthcare.
I mean, there's some spotty coverage even of ketamine therapy itself, but the odds are a lot of patients are going to be paying out of pocket. So you want to evaluate, of course, not just the price, but all the services that come with it, the group therapy, the education, the follow-up consultations. So I would weigh all of that.
This is a situation where you do not want to hunt for the best price. You want to make sure that you're being treated in the way that you need to be treated to get better.
Right. It may seem tempting, but I would really weigh all the other services that are going to wrap around that part of your mental health treatment.
Well, Eleanor, thank you so much for coming on here and bringing this important story to us. Please read Eleanor's story to get more. And thank you so much, Eleanor. We'll have you on again.
Thank you.
Before we go, it's time for What We're Watching, a look at the news you need to know for the rest of the week and beyond. Starbucks and McDonald's executives said this week that customers are beginning to scrutinize their discretionary purchases more closely this year. That could be troubling news for the economy, which has been supported in recent years by surprisingly strong consumer spending. With two of the most widespread U.S. chains reporting a pullback in the first 3 months of the year, fears are growing about the effects of years-long inflation on Americans' wallets and spending habits. Berkshire Hathaway will hold its annual meeting on Saturday, an event that has become quite the party for Warren Buffett and his company. But this year's event may be more somber, as it will be the first since the death of Buffett's longtime compatriot, Charlie Munger. Still, Buffett's annual letter outlining his thoughts on the current state of investing and the economy, which he has issued for nearly 60 years in a row now, will make news this weekend. The monthly jobs report will be released tomorrow, and if you couldn't tell from our discussion about wages and layoffs, it will be crucial to understanding the current state of the U.S. economy. After the federal government reported recently that gross domestic product declined in the first quarter while inflation began growing again, there are concerns about stagflation floating around, which this report could dispute or bolster. We'll talk more about that next week. And that's it for this episode. Thanks to Venessa Wong and Eleanor Laise. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and please do. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating or review. It really helps others discover the show. And let us know what you want to hear from us. You can reach us at onwatch@marketwatch.com. The show is hosted by me, Jeremy Owens, and produced by Meta Lutzoft and Isaac Gaines, who also mixed this episode. Melissa Haggerty is the executive producer. We'll be back next week with a new episode, and until then, we'll be watching.